She had always been proud of her hair. It was long, dark, and thick, falling past her shoulders in waves that caught the light. It was the kind of hair people noticed, the kind women envied and men admired. But on a humid Tuesday morning in late September, Private First Class Elena Vance sat in a wooden chair in the center of the women's barracks at Forward Operating Base Hammer, watching it all fall to the floor in sad, dark clumps. The scissors were dull. That was the worst part. They didn't cut cleanly. They tugged and pulled at her scalp, making her eyes water. The woman holding them, a stocky sergeant first class named Marjorie Holt, was not a barber. She was the senior NCO in charge of administrative discipline, and she was enjoying her work far too much. "Look at that," Holt muttered to the two other female soldiers flanking her, their arms crossed over their chests. "Just falls right out, doesn't it? Like it was never anything special." The other women, Corporals Davis and Reyes, snickered. They had been Holt's sycophants for months, eager to please the woman who controlled weekend passes and duty rosters. Vance stared straight ahead at the gray concrete wall, her jaw tight. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a tear. The offense had been absurd. A button, a single brass uniform button missing from her blouse during a random inspection the day before. Holt had pounced on it like a hawk on a field mouse, and writing her up for conduct unbecoming and gross indifference to appearance standards. The punishment, handed down by Holt herself without any officer oversight, was corrective training and a regulation haircut. The Army had standards, of course. Hair was supposed to be neat and off the collar. But this was a butchering. Holt wasn't cutting it to regulation. She was cutting it to scalp in some places, leaving jagged tufts in others. She was creating a spectacle, and a walking advertisement for what happened to those who crossed Sergeant First Class Holt. Vance had transferred to FOB Hammer only 3 months prior. She was a signals intelligence analyst, a quiet, brainy type who spent her days in a dark room listening to encrypted chatter. She kept to herself, did her job well, and had no interest in the petty politics of the barracks. Holt, a woman who thrived on that very politics, had seen her quiet confidence as a challenge. She'd tried to get Vance to join her unofficial circle, to come to her off-base parties, to laugh at her jokes. Vance had politely declined each time, preferring to read or video chat with her younger brother back home. That had been the real sin. The missing button was just an excuse. "Maybe we should take a picture," Davis suggested, her voice a cruel whisper. "For the unit newsletter. Before and after, the importance of discipline." Holt paused, the scissors hovering near Vance's ear. A slow, ugly smile spread across her face. "That's not a bad idea, Davis. Get my phone." Vance's stomach lurched. A public flogging wasn't enough. Now they wanted a permanent record. They wanted to circulate her humiliation. Her hands, resting on her knees, curled into fists. She could feel the cold dread spreading through her chest, but she kept her face immobile. She was a soldier. She would endure. Holt took the phone and stepped back, framing the shot. "Look up, Private. Look at the camera. Show everyone how proud you are of your new haircut." Just as Vance lifted her gaze, the heavy metal door to the barracks swung open, slamming against the concrete wall with a deafening clang. Everyone in the room froze. Holt's thumb hovered over the camera button. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a crisp, olive-drab uniform. She was of medium height, with sharp, intelligent eyes and close-cropped gray hair. On her collar were the stars of a brigadier general, and on her chest was a row of ribbons so full and distinguished it looked like a rainbow had been pressed into service. She was not alone. Flanking her were 2 stern-faced command sergeants major, their chests heavy with brass and their eyes missing nothing. The air in the room changed instantly. The petty cruelty evaporated, replaced by a suffocating wave of protocol and terror. Holt dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Davis and Reyes snapped to attention so fast they nearly fell over. "At ease," the general said, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. It was not a suggestion. It was a command that settled over the room like a physical force. General Aris Thorne had not intended to come to the women's barracks. She was the new deputy commander of the entire division, and she was making a whirlwind tour of the forward operating base, getting a feel for the morale and conditions of her troops. And her aide had pointed out the administrative building, but something had made her pause. A feeling, perhaps, or the glimpse of a shadow moving past a window. She had decided on a whim to see the enlisted quarters unannounced, to get a look without the usual fanfare of polished officers leading the way. Now she stood in the middle of a scene that made her blood run cold, though her face betrayed nothing. She saw the dark hair scattered on the floor like a tragedy. She saw the young soldier in the chair, her head a mess of jagged cuts and bare patches, her face pale but set in a mask of stoic endurance. She saw the phone on the floor and the smug, cruel look that was just beginning to fade from the senior NCO's face. "What is going on here, Sergeant?" General Thorne asked. She didn't need to ask. She knew. She had been in the Army for over 30 years. She had seen this kind of petty tyranny before. It's the small people who used their tiny sliver of power to inflict maximum misery. It disgusted her then, and it disgusted her now. Holt swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. "Ma'am! Administering non-judicial punishment, ma'am, for violation of uniform regulations." General Thorne's gaze drifted from the floor to the soldier in the chair. "Stand up, soldier." Vance rose. Her legs felt weak, but she stood as straight as she could, her eyes fixed on a point just over the general's left shoulder. She could feel the cool air on her exposed scalp, and the shame of it burned hotter than any sun. "Your name and rank?" the general asked, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Private First Class Elena Vance, ma'am." General Thorne nodded slowly. She looked at the hair on the floor, at the brutal unevenness of the cut. This was not a regulation haircut. This was an assault. She then looked at the NCO. "Sergeant Holt, ma'am. Sergeant First Class Holt. Sergeant Holt." Show me in the regulations where it states that a punishment haircut is to be administered with what appears to be a pair of garden shears, resulting in lacerations and an uneven, unsightly appearance that itself is a violation of the very standards you claim to be upholding. Holt's face went white. "Ma'am, She was insolent, ma'am. She needed to be taught a lesson." "A lesson," the general repeated, the two words dripping with quiet disdain, and she turned to the Command Sergeant Major on her left. "Command Sergeant Major West, your assessment?" The senior enlisted man, a grizzled veteran with decades of service, didn't hesitate. His voice was a low rumble. "This is not punishment, ma'am. This is hazing. It's a violation of Article 93 of the UCMJ, cruelty and maltreatment. It's a court-martial offense." Holt looked like she might be sick. Davis and Reyes seemed to be trying to merge with the wall behind them. The general's other aide, and a young captain, was already pulling out a small notebook and a pen, his face grim. General Thorne turned her attention back to Vance. She looked at the young woman's eyes. They were dry, but there was a deep well of pain and humiliation in them. It was a look Thorne had seen before, in the eyes of young soldiers who had been broken by the very people meant to build them up. "Private Vance," the general said, "you are a signals intelligence analyst." Is that correct?" Vance was surprised she knew. "Yes, ma'am." "I was a signals intelligence officer for the first 15 years of my career," Thorne said, a hint of warmth finally entering her voice. "I know the work. It requires patience, intellect, and a cool head under pressure. Qualities, I suspect, that Sergeant Holt here does not possess or value." She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the clumps of hair, the dropped phone, the cowering NCOs. Command Sergeant Major West, I want the following done immediately. First, I want the medical officer here to examine Private Vance. I want any scalp lacerations documented and treated. Second, I want a formal inquiry opened into the conduct of Sergeant First Class Holt and Corporals Davis and Reyes. I want a full investigation into every punishment they have administered in the last 12 months. I want to know if this is an isolated incident or a pattern of behavior. Yes, ma'am, West replied, already pulling out his own communication device. Holt found her voice, a desperate, squeaking thing. General, please, you don't understand. It's how we maintain order here. It's how things are done. General Thorne held up a hand, and Holt fell silent as if struck. Sergeant Holt, you are mistaken. This is not how things are done. Not in my army. Not anywhere. She took a step closer to Holt, her voice dropping so only those in the immediate circle could hear. Oh, you are given rank and authority to lead, to mentor, to protect. You used it to terrorize, you used it to humiliate, and you did it in front of witnesses, with a smile on your face and a phone in your hand to document your handiwork. You have not only disgraced yourself and your stripes, you have potentially damaged the trust and morale of a highly skilled soldier. That is a failure of leadership that borders on sabotage. She turned her back on Holt, a final, devastating dismissal. Now she walked over to Vance, who was still standing at attention, trembling slightly. At ease, Private. For real this time. Thorne looked at her, really looked at her. What's your first name, soldier? Elena, ma'am. Elena. Do you have a family? Anyone back home? Vance nodded, her voice catching for the first time. My brother, ma'am. He's 17. I'm all he has. General Thorne's eyes softened further. She reached out and gently touched Vance's arm. And you're worried about what he'll see if a picture of this ends up online? What he'll think? Vance's iron composure finally cracked. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Yes, ma'am. Look at me, Elena. Vance looked up. The general's eyes were fierce now, but with a protective fire. That phone is evidence now. No picture is going anywhere. And as for your brother, when you call him next, you can tell him that you stood up to bullies, that you didn't break. That's the story he'll hear. She then did something that left everyone in the room stunned. She looked at the command sergeant major. West, get me Private Vance's service record. West handed her a tablet. General Thorne scrolled through it silently for a minute. Vance's record was excellent. Top marks in technical training, commendations for her analytical work, a quiet but steady rise through the ranks. She paused on one particular notation. It says here you scored in the top 1% on the language aptitude test. You're fluent in Arabic and Pashto? Yes, ma'am. Self-taught mostly. My grandmother was from Lebanon. Thorne nodded, a small smile touching her lips. She handed the tablet back to West and turned to face the small crowd that had begun to gather at the open door. Soldiers from nearby barracks, drawn by the commotion and the sight of a general's vehicle. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Siu, attention!" The chatter ceased immediately. Everyone snapped to attention. General Thorne stood next to Vance, a deliberate act of solidarity. Soldiers of FOB Hammer, what you are seeing here today is a failure of leadership at the NCO level, but you are also about to see what real leadership looks like. She looked directly at Vance. Private First Class Elena Vance. Vance stood rigid, unsure of what was happening. This soldier, Thorne continued, her voice ringing with authority, is a signals intelligence analyst of exceptional skill. Her work, which I have personally reviewed, has contributed directly to the success of missions that have saved American lives. Her records are impeccable. Her dedication is beyond question. She paused, letting the words sink in. And yet, this morning, she was